And so I feel like this is very symbolic, right? Because it represents how there are so many moments in life that are huge and feel monumentous and feel like they should have a lasting impact, and yet they end up being so empty and unfulfilling and almost don't even matter in the long run. Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I'm talking about The Virgin Suicides by Jeffery Eugenides, released in 1993, and the movie adaptation is directed by Sofia Coppola and was released in 1999. And this won a book versus movie poll that I posted, so if you have not yet subscribed to my channel, you definitely should. That way you can take part in future book versus movie polls. I literally had one end just a few days ago, but I do them like about every month, every other month, every month. So definitely subscribe and I will have another poll before long. And someone commented on the poll that this one won for, user DVDV8197. They commented saying, I never really understood the Virgin Suicides movie, so perhaps that video could give me more insight. And I will do my best to give you more insight on this book and movie. And as always, with like all of my videos, even though I am recording my thoughts and opinions and putting it out there for all the world to hear, that does not mean that I think my opinion is the correct one or my interpretation is right. I am always wanting to hear other people's opinions, right? Because a lot of this is just so subjective and it's all based on just our perceptions of the world based on our background and who we are and how we were raised, and just like our own personality determines how we interpret these things. And that's what I love about art and in books and movies, the conversation that can be had and all of the differing opinions, and whether I agree with you or not. Like, I just love to hear people's take on things, you know? So yeah, whether you agree with my opinions on this or not, comment down below and we can all talk about it. And this was Sofia Coppola's debut movie, and some people do consider it to be their favorite of hers, and so I was curious to watch this one for that reason. And this is the third Coppola movie I have covered. I did an episode for The Beguiled. I compared the book with the movie from the 70s as well as the movie she made from 2017. And then I also did a book versus movie for the Priscilla Presley movies. I will link to both of those down below in the description in case you are interested in watching them. But on to The Virgin Suicides. This book and movie are both told from the perspective of a group of men who are reflecting back on their childhood. They grew up on the street where the Lisbon family lived, and they were specifically obsessed with the 5 Lisbon sisters, and all of them ended up taking their own lives. And so these men are reflecting back on their childhood, their teenage years, and their 5 sisters and the events that led up to their deaths. And I'm just gonna get right into the plot, which means we will be getting into spoilers from here on out. So beginning with Cecilia, who is the youngest Lisbon sister, she is 13 years old, and both book and movie begin with the attempt that she takes on her own life. However, she does survive. And shortly after this, the parents throw a party because they are told, like, the girls, they need more socializing. And so they have a party where they invite boys from the neighborhood. And during this party, Cecilia asks to be excused, and once she leaves, she then does take her own life. And right before Cecilia asks to be excused, there is a special needs boy in town who shows up at the party, and the narrator says that once this guy shows up, he says like they just started having fun. And they were kind of messing with this guy, like telling him to do this or say that, and then like laughing at how he did or said things. And so this seems significant, right? That it is when this is happening that Cecilia asks to leave. Like, I feel like this is a good example of just the inhuman way people can treat others, seeing someone not as a human, but as, you know, an object or entertainment, which is a theme that comes up throughout this book and movie. And yeah, Cecilia, she dies over the summertime, and once school is back in session, the 4 remaining sisters are back in school, and their father is also a teacher at the high school. And Lux Lisbon is the sister who we focus on the most, I would say, in both book and movie. And in both, we see that once school is back in session, like, she's very flirty, and she's also kind of a rebel. Like, she smokes with another girl at school in the lockers, which that's only in the book that she smokes. In the movie, we don't really hear about that. But in both, yeah, she like flirts with other guys, and there's a number of guys that she'll like make out with. And the narrators of the story, they try to talk to these men who have, or these boys who have like hooked up kind of with Lux, but they're all kind of stupid, and they just like don't have any insight into who she is as a person. And the only one of Lux's quote unquote boyfriends to say anything to them is Trip Fontaine. And Trip is the popular boy in high school who just all the girls love, and he never has a hard time getting any girl because, you know, he's just like such a heartthrob. And an interesting detail we get in the book is that Trip, he had lost his virginity in his early teens when he was on vacation with his father, and he lost his virginity to a 37-year-old woman. And this is a detail that is not in the movie, which didn't surprise me, I guess, guess, but I feel like it is like a key detail into Trip's character. Like, I know to be intimate with an older woman is a fantasy boys have, but the reality of that is like really disgusting and gross. And I feel like having that formative experience that had to have impacted him, right? In a negative way, I would think. But anyway, Trip, he becomes obsessed with Lux Lisbon because she seems to be disinterested in him. And like I said, most girls are falling over him. So when he finally has like a pretty girl who doesn't seem interested, he becomes interested. And all of the Lisbon girls are also like very sheltered. They're raised by strict religious parents and they're not like the most social. They're very mysterious, and then they also seem like so innocent and pure. And so along with their good looks, like these things just add to their appeal. But he does go over to their house to meet the family and they watch TV, and then once he leaves, he and Lux have like a secret makeout. And after this, he is able to convince Mr. and Mr. Lisbon to let him take Lux to the homecoming dance, but the parents say that he can only take her if he finds dates for the other girls, and they'll all go in a group, and then they have to be back by curfew. And so all of the sisters go to the dance and they are all just having a fantastic time. And Lux, like I said, like she's the biggest rebel of the group, I would say. And so during the dance, she is drinking and making out with Trip. And then as the evening goes on, she and Trip leave and they go out onto the football field where they have sex. And because they're out on the football field, the other group, it's time to leave because they need to make curfew and they can't find Lux, but they don't want to get in trouble. So they're like, we just gotta go. And of Lux and Trip in the book we read, throughout the act, headlights came onto the field, sweeping over them, lighting up the goalpost. Lux said in the middle, I always screw things up. I always do, and began to sob. Trip Fontaine told us little more. We asked him if he put her in a cab, but he said no. I walked home that night. I didn't care how she got home. I just took off. It's weird, man. I liked her. I really liked her. I just got sick of her right then. And he's older when they are interviewing him. And he says of her how like, you know, like she was the one that got away kind of a thing. And how like he was lucky to have tasted that kind of love at least once in his life. But like clearly, like he didn't love her. And it doesn't seem like he even cared about her. And like the only reason he was interested in her to begin with is because, you know, like with all the Lisbon sisters, they all just seemed like so unattainable and pure. And so once he had been with her, she lost the allure of being unattainable and pure. And so he just got sick of her, like he said, and had no interest in her from there on out. But of course, when he looks back on the past, and especially since she has died, he can now look back and act like it was something that it wasn't. And we see this in the movie as well, where Lux wakes up on the football field and she is all alone. And in both, she takes a taxi home and is hours beyond her curfew. And so after Lux breaks curfew, after this, the Lisbon daughters are no longer allowed to leave the house. They don't go to school, much less anywhere else. They are just never seen outside of the house. And the only one that they see leave the house is Mr. Lisbon, who is a teacher. However, in the book, he gets laid off because he starts like acting weird and people are uncomfortable around him. And so he's laid off in the book. And once he no longer has a job, like people don't see anybody coming or going from the house. Whereas in the movie, Mr. Lisbon still keeps his job. So that part is different. And then also in the book, the house becomes a mess, which is also not the case in the movie. But yeah, in the book, the house, like it's so bad that like there's like a smell coming from the house even. And also in the book, it's implied that the mom is also a bit of an alcoholic and she also is super strict and religious, which the movie does show. The movie doesn't show the house becoming a mess, and it also doesn't show that the mom drank, but we do see that she was religious and she made Lux burn her rock and roll records. But at this point, the Lisbon girls just become even more mysterious in a way, and so the boys in the neighborhood, like across the way and stuff, they just continue to become more obsessed and they keep spying on the house to try to see what's going on in there. And they find notes like in their mailbox and things that show that the Lisbon girls will like leave the house during the night and just leave these notes on like the boys' houses. And also during this time, the boys start seeing Lux on top of her roof having sex with random men. And at one point in the book, Lux, she pretends to be like really sick. So an ambulance comes and takes her to the hospital, but turns out she was just worried that she was pregnant and she needed to find a way to like take a test to find out, but she didn't want her parents to know what she was doing on the roof. And so she therefore pretended to be like super sick. That way she could go to the hospital and tell the doctor her concerns. But he has her take a test and turns out she's not pregnant. This part of her going to the hospital is not in the movie. But in both, the boys want to find a way to contact the Lisbon sisters, and ultimately they decide to simply call. So they start start calling the Lisbon house, and rather than say anything, they will just play a song. And then this goes back and forth where the boys play a song and then the Lisbon sisters play a song. And the boys tend to pick songs that are all about like love and admiration, whereas the girls, because we get a list of what songs are played in the book, and the girls tend to play songs that are about like being lonely and isolated. And in the book, the boys comment about how the girls always chose songs with like impersonal topics, but really like it's not that they were impersonal, they just weren't the love songs that the boys were playing, and they were hoping that the girls would be playing love songs too. So I feel like simply because it wasn't the songs they wanted, they therefore dismissed them as being impersonal. And I did love this scene in the movie when they're going back and forth playing the music. I thought that was really well done. And eventually the boys start seeing the Lisbon sisters because they're spying on them through the window, and they see the sisters starting to pack, and they also just have like more purpose as they move about their rooms. And so the boys are like, oh, like they're gonna try to escape soon. And then around this time they get a note saying, watch out for midnight, we'll send you the signal. And so they think that the Lisbon sisters want the boys' help, and I'm calling them boys, but they're all teenagers. Like the oldest Lisbon sister is like 17, and so same with the boys, they're all like high school teenage years. Anyway, so they're like, oh, they want our help getting out of the house. And so the next night midnight rolls around and they get the signal, so then they go over to the house and Lux answers the door, and she's being super flirty, saying things like, oh, like, can I sit in the front seat? Like, who's gonna sit beside me? And can I help steer? And just different things like that. And she also walks up to one of the boys and she begins undoing his belt and pants, but then she stops and she tells them like, oh, you guys stay here and wait for my sisters, and I'm gonna go wait in the car. And then while the boys are waiting for the other sisters, they hear a sound in the basement, and so they go down there, and that is when they see one of the Lisbon girls' dead bodies. And so they run out of the house, and then after the fact they find out that all of the girls had ended their lives that night. And in the movie they all die, but in the book Mary survives the attempt, only to live for like 1 month before later eventually ending her life. And after the deaths, Mr. Lisbon hires someone to clean out the house so they can put it up for sale, because remember in the book the house was like a mess. And they talk about how like when the guy was cleaning out the house, how like he would wear this intense suit, and how just there was so much junk and trash and mildew, and that it was just disgusting. And the book and movie end with the boys going to this like debutante coming out ball for the girls in the neighborhood, and there was like some toxic smell in the air from like some kind of lake pollution or something. And so they make the theme for this party like asphyxiation, and so they're all wearing like gas masks and things, and adults and teens alike are just like getting drunk and making out and throwing up. And in the book we read of these debutante girls, pounds of hair were secured atop their heads, drunk and kissing us or passing out in chairs, they were bound for college, husbands, child rearing, unhappiness only dimly perceived, bound, in other words, for life. And by the way, I didn't mention, but this book takes place I think in the 70s, like early 70s. So one of the bigger symbols in the book that the movie keeps is the cutting down of elm trees in the neighborhood. So the city will determine if a tree is like sick, they will cut it down so that the disease doesn't spread to other trees. However, slowly but surely they are just cutting down all of the trees. And there is a tree in front of the Lisbon house that is going to be cut down, and this is like during the time when the girls are forced to stay in the house. Men come to chop the tree down, and all of the Lisbon girls run outside to stop them from cutting it. And so the men go up to the parents being like, get your girls out of here, we got to cut this tree down, it's, you know, it's sick, it's dying, it's going to spread its disease. And this part, like the parents actually stick with their daughters, and they like argue back with the men being like, you know, is this really the best method, and whatever, this is our yard, like they're just standing in their front lawn, that's not illegal. And so I really like that the parents are like sticking up for their daughters, and I feel like this is a rare scene where we see like the whole family standing together. And in the book we read as the years went on, like all the trees did end up getting cut down, and then in the book it says, we got to see how truly unimaginative our suburb was. Everything laid out on a grid whose bland uniformity the trees had hidden, and the old ruses of differentiated architectural styles lost their power to make us feel unique. And at the time of the deaths, people in the neighborhood blamed the Lisbon girls for like the decline of the neighborhood, but then they end up having a different view as time goes on, and we read, though at first people blamed them, gradually a sea of change took place so that the girls were seen not as scapegoats but as seers. More and more people forgot about the individual reasons why the girls may have killed themselves, the stress disorders, the insufficient neurotransmitters, and instead put their deaths down to the girls' foresight. In the end, the tortures tearing the Lisbon girls pointed to a simple reasoned refusal to accept the world as it was handed down to them, so full of flaws. And the Lisbon girls can be seen as wanting to save this tree because it was something that had been important to Cecilia, specifically in the movie. I do not remember Cecilia like talking about the elm trees in the book. So in the movie, there is this obvious connection there. But I think the bigger meaning here is that it represents the girls wanting to hold on to youth and not go into an adulthood that is unimaginative and like everybody else's. Because we all want to be someone who is unique and special and doing things that are different, just like the town wanted to be unique and special, right? But then as soon as the elm trees are gone, they realize how bland their town really is, and it's just like everyone else. And so along those lines, when you leave your childhood and leave your youth and you go into an adulthood that has been planned for you, and it is exactly like everybody else's, whether you're a man or a woman, you know, at this time, there was an idea of like the life you were meant to live, right? And it wasn't a life that was unique or special or different. And so I think that's what it really represents with the Lisbon girls wanting to hold on to this tree. They don't want to leave childhood. And that also is the symbolism with just the lack of trees as time goes on. And there's a great visual where they cut down a tree that had a tire swing attached to it. So they're tossing away the tire swing as they cut down this tree, which obviously is a great visual of literally throwing childhood away to go into a bland adulthood. And going back to the debutante party and like the life that was awaiting the females in particular in the 50s and 60s and 70s, getting married was the goal for women at that time. And so very few women went to college, and a lot of them did drop out because if it kept you from getting married, then it was seen as holding you back, right? And so at this time, a lot of women experienced feeling just so unsatisfied and unhappy with their life. And so maybe the Lisbon girls, you know, they were too young to have quite experienced this, but maybe they saw that that was in store for them. And it makes me almost wonder more about their mom. Like maybe they saw some of this in their mom and they were like, if that's the future ahead of me, like, I don't want that. And so if you see this book as being more literal, that could represent the reasons behind their actions. But there is, you know, just so much symbolism to this book, and the Lisbon girls obviously have a lot of symbolism with who they are and what they represent. And so you can't take it literally, but I think like a symbolic way you could see it too, you know, they're rejecting the life that has been laid out for them. And so it could represent America at this time was going through changes and rejecting the life that had been going on, for better or for worse. And so it just represents the changing views and people wanting to break free and people not accepting life the way it was. And they're just like, no, I am going to reject this and I'm going to make my own rules. And then I do think it's interesting seeing how the townspeople see the Lisbon girls and how initially they don't like the impact that this has on their town and they feel like it's causing their town to go downhill. But then as time, they're almost seen as seers and heroes who knew what was coming before anybody else. And I think seeing them in either way is bad because it kind of dehumanizes them either way. And then a big part of the book and movie is how the boys perceive the Lisbon girls. And we see this in the movie as well, but the book has more examples of how the boys saw the Lisbon girls as just like sexual objects. And like I said, because they had such strict parents, they came across as like, you know, forbidden and innocent and pure and mysterious. Though when we see them like on an individual level, we see that that didn't really represent the Lisbon girls at all, but that's how they were perceived by others. And then also the boys had the idea that the girls needed to be rescued, right? Like even before they were like grounded and, you know, sequestered in their home, but especially once they just stay in their home and don't come out, the boys definitely see themselves as going in and like needing to rescue these girls. And of course, a boy can't resist the thought of a damsel in distress that he can go in and save. But yeah, the boys just kind of see them as a conquest, and prior to their deaths, like they just loved getting chances to like see inside their homes or talk to boys who had made out with Lux just so that they could like get information and go brag to their friends about what they found out and what they saw. And the sisters are also seen as the same. Like so often we hear that people can't differentiate them. And so again, not seeing them as like individual people, but just seeing them as this like idea, right? And Trip also sees Lux as a conquest. Like I said, the only reason he was interested in her is because she wasn't interested in him, and also, you know, the ideas he had about the Lisbons. And again, he claims that like he never got over her, but he treated her just like an object to be used. And then the parents also didn't see the daughters as like the individuals they were. Like they saw them individually, but I mean like they didn't see like who their daughters really were. Like the mom especially, because she was like more strict and religious, she had an idea of how her daughters should be. And if they didn't fit the mold she had made, then she just became even more controlling to try to get, you know, to try to force them into being that mold. Like she didn't want to accept who they really were. You know, for example, like having Lux burn her records, right? Like she didn't like that was part of Lux's personality, and so she wanted to get rid of it. And then Mr. Lisbon, like I said, he works at the school. He is like a math teacher. And in both book and movie, he is at the homecoming dance. And in the movie, we see him, you know, because Lux wins homecoming queen and he sees his daughters dancing and having fun. And there's a part where he's like smiling and he's filled with joy, you know, to see his daughters experiencing this. And this, I don't remember being described in the book at all. And there's also a part in the movie, once the girls are like grounded at home, he is talking to the plants and being kind of aloof. And someone says something to him being like, hey, like your daughters haven't been in school in a while. And he says like, oh, have you checked outside? So it seems like he kind of like disassociated in a way. Like he either couldn't or wouldn't interfere with the way his wife was raising the daughters. And so instead, it seems like he just kind of separated himself from it and maybe was in denial. Plus, they're all still dealing with the grief of Cecilia's death. But yeah, in general, I would say the dad he seemed nicer in the movie than he did in the book. But I would say the parents, they became more controlling, you know, after homecoming, obviously. And after Cecilia's death, that just added another layer to what they were all dealing with. And so maybe the parents were acting in more extreme ways because they were still grieving, right? And they were wanting to try to control their daughters and get them to be who they wanted to be. That way the parents could feel secure in who their daughters were. But yeah, I think like the death of Cecilia and the way the parents handled it, as well as how they were treated by kids in school, definitely added to the Lisbon sisters just being so disenchanted in life and feeling trapped and like they had no choices. And then Lux having sex with men on her roof was her, again, trying to find meaning in life. And she would ask the men like what this meant to them, but like it didn't mean anything to them. So again, it was something that she was turning to, hoping that it would provide her with something more meaningful in her life, but to find out that it was just empty, again, just like added to the hopelessness. And I did want to talk about the news too, because in both book and movie, we see how the Lisbon girls are turned into this news spectacle, and that the news doesn't actually care about the girls. They're just using this because it's an interesting story that like people will want to watch and it helps their own ratings. And the news yet again does not see the girls as individuals because they will like have a picture of Mary up on the screen, but then call her Bonnie, and they'll share like quote unquote facts that are totally unfounded. So again, just showing that they don't actually care about these girls as individuals. And in the book we read, we saw how wildly our sphere of influence was misrepresented by those in no position to know what was going on. Even our parents seemed to agree more and more with the television version of things, listening to the reporters' inanities as though they could tell us the truth about our own lives. And yeah, that's such a great section, like specifically the line about how people who are in no position to know anything act like they know the truth. You know, they have all the details. And then too, about how like we will cling to the news acting like it's a reliable source when really like every news station, like I said, they're just cared about money and ratings and getting a lot of views, getting a lot of clicks these days. And very rarely, like I hate the news because I feel like very rarely do they actually care. You know, they just want a sensational story that will make them money. And this is really a coming of age story, more about the boys coming of age, right? Since the girls, they die so young. And into adulthood, these boys who have now become men, they still obsess over the Lisbon sisters, and they have all of these, you know, artifacts from this time period that they gather together, and when they meet up, they go over the details and try to comb through everything to try to get more information onto who these girls were and why they did what they did. And they go around tracking people down to interview them, right? Like they did with Trip, because they are just so desperate to try to see the bigger picture. And in the book we read, in the end, we had the pieces of a puzzle, but no matter how we put them together, gaps remained, oddly shaped emptinesses mapped by what surrounded them. And then at the end of the book, it says, it didn't matter in the end how old they had been or that they had been girls, but only that we had loved them and that they hadn't heard us calling. Still do not hear us, up here in the treehouse with our thinning hair and soft bellies, calling them out of those rooms where they went to be alone for all time, alone in suicide, which is deeper than death, and where we will never find the pieces to put them back together. And so even as adults, they are still calling out to the Lisbon sisters, trying to save them, despite the fact that they're long gone. And the boys are just so desperate to make sense of things, and they are trying to understand the Lisbon sisters, and they cannot let go. And so again, this just makes me wonder, like, what is it the Lisbon sisters represent? represent in the greater sense, right? Like, what is it the boys can't let go of? What is it the men can't let go of as they go into adulthood? Like, is it their childhood in general that they are calling out to and that they want to have back? Or is it, you know, that time in America that they're calling out to and they wish they could go back in time to the 70s, back before things really started to change, I guess? Because like I said, you could take this book literally and you could wonder why the boys think back to the girls in a literal sense. But I think what the girls represent is what I find really intriguing, and yet I'm having a hard time figuring it out. Like, I've kind of theorized, but I haven't come to a conclusion that I feel satisfied with. So definitely share your thoughts in the comments. And the author himself hasn't said like there's a concrete answer to this book and to what it all means. He is letting it be open to interpretation, which I think is really cool. And again, I think that's just the beauty of stories like this, is they are so interpretive. But yeah, I think there's definitely something more specific that the boys, the men, are calling out to from their past, whether it's their own childhood, you know, the innocence of youth and the lack of responsibilities maybe, or again, if it's calling back to a specific time in America that they miss. And then literally, if they're just calling back to the Lisbon sisters, you know, they didn't get to save them and swoop in and be the heroes they thought they would be, which obviously they were fantasizing about that in an unrealistic way, which we do get a great scene where they are fantasizing about driving away with the Lisbon sisters. But the reality is, at some point, the boys would be like, I mean, we got to get back home. Like, we can't just be going on the run with you girls. And so something would have happened and they would have left the girls, and who knows what would have happened to them. Maybe they all would have just returned home and realized that this was an unrealistic plan. So yeah, just not seeing the reality of it in a lot of ways, but still they maybe regret that they couldn't have saved them more. But some other final thoughts. So another part I wanted to talk about is, like I said, in the book and movie Lux and Trip, they win homecoming king and queen. And in the book, Lux, she asks him like, oh, like, what does this mean for the future? Like, what do we have to do now? And Trip tells her, like, it means nothing. Like, we just get crowned tonight and then that's it. It's over. And I love this part in the book because it really seems to foreshadow the adulthood that was in store for these characters, and how there are so many moments in life that are huge and feel monumentous and feel like they should have a lasting impact, and yet they end up being so empty and unfulfilling and almost don't even matter in the long run, and you get no satisfaction from it. And this goes for men and women alike, because, you know, you can see this as being about the female experience, and obviously that is a big part of the story. But again, like I said earlier, boys and girls alike are expected to be on a certain trajectory, right? By society, by their parents. And so regardless of your gender, you're going down this path that is expected of you, and you're marking off these huge milestones that maybe in your mind, you're like, once I hit this point in my life, like that will be the moment that I will, you know, it'll fix my problems and I'll be happy and it'll have a long lasting impact throughout the rest of my life that just like means something and is valuable. But then if it's not something that you actually had wanted, it just ends up feeling empty and has no long lasting impact the way you thought it would, and it just makes you feel unfulfilled. You know, just like being crowned homecoming king and queen. It seemed like a monumentous occasion and they make such a big deal out of it that night, but after that it means nothing, and it actually is not fulfilling at all. And also, I did want to mention Josh Hartnett's wig. It looked so bad. So many other guys just have normal hair, so why couldn't they give Josh Hartnett normal hair? His wig was distracting. And then also in the book, their homecoming dresses, the mom sews them. And in both book and movie, they're described as looking like sacks because they are just so unflattering. They're super baggy and loose. But then when we see the dresses, I thought they looked nice and they looked very fitting for the time. And then I also wanted to mention, I watched an interview with the author and he talked about what sparked the idea for this book. And it's because he was talking to his nephew's babysitter, and the babysitter kind of randomly confided in him that she and her sisters, when they were teenagers, they had like either contemplated or even attempted to end their lives. And when he asked her why, she kind of, you know, clammed up a bit, and all she would say is that there was a lot of pressure on us. But on to book versus movie. So Coppola is known for these coming of age stories. Although as far as coming of age goes, it seems like she often focuses on the younger side, right? Like in Priscilla, she focuses so well on the time when Priscilla is young and so influenced by Elvis. But then once Priscilla becomes her own person, the movie kind of comes to an abrupt halt, right? And we don't even see what happens once Priscilla is like her own self. And so this movie I've heard people praise because it focuses only on the youth aspect, and the story does end when the girls die. Because yeah, the Lisbon sisters, it's like, as far as they're concerned, it's like an anti-coming of age story. And the movie is very atmospheric, and I did really like the performances. It did seem rushed at times, but nonetheless, it is very faithful to the book. But the book, it does have just like so many more details, like I said, which of course is most often the case. The book does usually have more details. And I did really like the writing style as well. So I did really enjoy this book. But even though the book does have more details and it does expand on things more, I still kind of want to say the movie wins because it is a great adaptation. Like, she really captured the overall, like, the mood and the atmosphere as well as the plot details specifically, but while still also trying to include some of the symbolism, which I didn't even get into all of the symbolism there is, but there's also the cemetery strike, which both book and movie show as well. And so I really do think that Coppola, like, she got the assignment and she really captured this book. And yeah, you know, there's not quite as much to dissect in the movie as there is in the book because the book, like I said, it just has so much more there. But the movie is a great adaptation, and I honestly don't have too many critiques as far as how it compares to the book. And it is so impressive too that this was his debut novel. And I watched an interview and he was quoting another author saying that the first book you write feels like a gift, but then it's the books after that that feel like more work, which I thought was interesting. So yeah, I kind of want to just say the movie wins, and yet at the same time that seems unfair because the book just has so much to it and it could be analyzed endlessly, but the movie can be analyzed a lot too, right? So I don't want to sell the movie short. So I think I will say the movie wins here. But really it's basically a tie because they really are both just so comparable and they just complement each other so well. And yeah, I guess that wraps it up for today's episode. Let me know what you thought down in the comments. I don't know if this book is read in like schools or colleges, but it should be. I feel like I like barely scratched the surface, but if anyone has like even more deeper thoughts into what this book means, I'd love to have you share those down in the comments. So thank you so much for watching this video. And then again, if you want more Sofia Coppola content, I will go ahead and link to Priscilla. I did really enjoy that movie as well, and the book was pretty good too. So you should definitely check that one out if you have not already. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.